He flaunted his Aston Martin, his Patek Philippe watch, and the 20-something model on his arm, all bought with the money he'd hidden during their divorce. He cornered his ex-wife Chloe in the lobby of a Michelin star restaurant just to mock her second-hand car and her struggling online business. He wanted to make sure she knew he was winning. What he didn't know was that across town, a lawyer was drafting a letter that would inform Chloe of an inheritance so vast it would make his entire lavish lifestyle look like pocket change. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about how a single act of forgotten kindness can change everything, turning a forgotten ex-wife into one of the most powerful women in the country. The chill of the November evening in Boston was nothing compared to the icy dread that washed over Chloe Redmond the moment she saw him. It had been 2 years since the divorce, 2 years of meticulously rebuilding her life from the rubble Jared Adler had left behind. She had been on her way to a modest celebratory dinner with 2 friends, a small victory for her online artisanal flower business finally turning a profit. And now, standing under the gilded awning of Aurelia, the 3 Michelin star restaurant they used to call their spot, was Jared. He wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman who couldn't have been older than 24, with legs that seemed to start at her collarbone and a cherry-red dress that cost more than Chloe's monthly rent. Madison Cole, a rising Instagram model Chloe had seen splashed across gossip blogs. Jared looked like he'd been sculpted from wealth itself. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his gym-honed frame. On his wrist the subtle glint of a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a watch he'd always coveted but claimed they couldn't afford when they were married. He was laughing, a deep, booming sound that used to make Chloe feel safe. Now it just sounded predatory. Chloe tried to shrink back into the shadows, hoping to slip past unnoticed, but Jared's eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, found hers. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He excused himself from his date and strode towards Chloe, his expensive leather shoes clicking menacingly on the marble floor. "Chloe." "Well, look at you," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. His eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of her outfit, a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a department store. A string of her grandmother's pearls her only accessory. "Still shopping off the rack, I see. Some things never change." Chloe's friends Anna and Beth tensed beside her. "Jared." "That's enough," Anna said, her voice firm. Jared ignored her, his focus entirely on his ex-wife. "I heard about your little project," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Petals and pots or something. How's that going? Making dozens of dollars a month, are we? I hope you're reporting it all on your taxes." The barb hit its mark. Chloe had poured her heart, soul, and meager savings into that business. It was her lifeline, the one thing that was truly hers. "It's doing well, thank you," she said, her voice tighter than she wanted. "Is it?" Jared's smile widened. He gestured back towards the curb where a valet was carefully polishing the fender of a midnight blue Aston Martin DB11. "Things are going pretty well for me, too. The private equity firm I joined after leaving the old company made me a junior partner. The buy-in was steep, but the returns—" He chuckled. "Let's just say I don't check price tags anymore." He was intentionally twisting the knife. He had started that firm with the capital he'd hidden offshore during their divorce proceedings. Money Chloe had helped him earn through years of supporting his career, hosting his clients, and managing their life so he could focus on work. The court had seen only a fraction of his true worth. "I have to go, Jared. My friends and I have a reservation," Chloe said, trying to move past him. He stepped in her way. "At Aurelia." "Don't be ridiculous. You can't afford a bottle of water here." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for her friends to hear. "Look, Chloe, I'm not a monster. I feel bad for you, I really do. How's that 2015 Honda Civic holding up? Still getting you from A to B?" He pulled out a sleek carbon fiber wallet. "Here." He tried to press a few $100 bills into her hand. "Go have a nice dinner somewhere else. On me. for old time's sake. The humiliation was a physical force, hot and suffocating. It wasn't just the money, it was the performance. He was doing this for Madison, who was watching with a smug, bored expression. He was doing this for the doorman. He was doing this to reinforce the narrative he had built, that he was the winner and she was the loser. Chloe's hand trembled as she pushed his away. The money fluttered to the ground. "I don't want your money, Jared. I never did. I just wanted a partner. A husband, not a competitor." His face hardened, the faux pity vanishing, replaced by the cold anger she knew so well. "You were holding me back, Chloe. You were an anchor. Look at me now. Look at you. The proof is right here." He turned his back on her, sauntering back to his date, who rewarded him with a kiss. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, the crisp $100 bills lying at her feet like an insult. The doorman averted his eyes, pretending not to see. Anna quietly picked up the money and tucked it into Chloe's purse. "Let's go," Beth whispered, gently steering a shell-shocked Chloe away from the restaurant. "We'll go to Giovanni's. It's better anyway." As they walked away, Chloe didn't dare look back. The image of Jared's smug face, the glint of his watch, and the sleek lines of his car were burned into her mind. Later that night, sitting in her small apartment, the celebratory mood long gone, she finally let the tears fall. She felt utterly and completely defeated. She had no idea that hundreds of miles away in a quiet, wood-paneled office, a chain of events had just been set in motion by a man she had never even met, a man who was about to hand her the power to shatter Jared's world. The week following the encounter at Aurelia was a blur of forced cheerfulness and gnawing self-doubt. Chloe threw herself into her work, arranging bouquets of winter roses and rare hellebores, until her fingers were raw, the sweet scent of the flowers a stark contrast to the bitterness in her heart. Jared's words echoed in her mind. You were an anchor. Was he right? Had she been the dead weight in their marriage? Her small two-bedroom apartment felt less like a cozy sanctuary and more like a cage of mediocrity. The profit she'd been so proud of now seemed pathetic. It was on a dreary Thursday afternoon that the letter arrived. It stood out from the usual stack of bills and junk mail like a relic from another era. The envelope was thick and heavy, made of a creamy textured cardstock that felt expensive to the touch. There was no stamp, only a neat postmark indicating it had been delivered by a private courier. Her name and address were handwritten in an elegant looping script. In the top left corner, embossed in a deep navy blue, were the words Chen and Associates Attorneys at Law, with an address on Park Avenue, New York City. Chloe's stomach twisted into a knot. A New York law firm. Her first thought was that Jared was suing her, perhaps for slander, or maybe he'd found some forgotten marital asset he wanted to claim. He was certainly vindictive enough. With trembling hands, she tore it open. The letter inside was on matching paper, the text crisp and formal. Dear Ms. Chloe Redmond, this letter serves as a formal request for your presence at our offices located at 230 Park Avenue, New York, NY at your earliest possible convenience. We are acting as the executors of the estate of our late client, Mr. Arthur Pemberton. The matter we wish to discuss is of the utmost importance and confidentiality, pertaining directly to Mr. Pemberton's final will and testament. Please contact my assistant, Ms. Albright, at the number provided below to arrange a meeting. We will, of course, cover all travel and accommodation expenses. Sincerely, David Chen, Senior Partner, Chen and Associates. Chloe read the letter 3 times. Arthur Pemberton. The name meant nothing to her. She searched her memory, scrolling through years of acquaintances, clients, and distant relatives. Nothing. It had to be a mistake. They must have the wrong Chloe Redmond. Her second thought was that it was a scam. A very elaborate, very sophisticated phishing attempt. But why would a scammer offer to fly her to New York and put her up in a hotel? Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, she decided to do some research. She booted up her old laptop and typed Chen and Associates into the search bar. The firm was real, and it was one of the most prestigious estate planning firms in the country, specializing in ultra-high net worth individuals. Their client list was rumored to include tech billionaires, old money dynasties, and international financiers. Next, she searched for Arthur Pemberton. The results were sparse, but what she found was staggering. Arthur Pemberton was a reclusive, legendary figure in the world of technology and engineering. He was the founder of Pemberton Industries, a privately held behemoth that had pioneered innovations in renewable energy, battery technology, and advanced materials. The few articles she found described him as an eccentric genius, a man who hadn't been photographed in public for over 30 years. There was a single grainy black-and-white photo from the 1970s of a young man with intense eyes and unruly hair. An obituary dated 2 weeks prior confirmed he had passed away at the age of 88, leaving no known children or immediate family. His net worth was estimated by financial magazines to be in the tens of billions. This only deepened the mystery. What could a man like that possibly have to do with her, a small business owner in Boston who drove a 10-year-old Honda? She called her friend Anna, her voice shaking as she read the letter aloud. "Chloe, this is insane," Anna said. "It sounds like something out of a movie. What if it's real?" "It can't be," Chloe insisted. "I've never met this man. I've never even heard of him. It's a mistake." "There's only one way to find out," Anna urged. "Call them. What have you got to lose? They're paying for the trip. At worst, it's a weird mix-up and you get a free trip to New York. At best. Well, who knows?" Summoning every ounce of her courage, Chloe dialed the number on the letterhead. A calm, professional voice answered. "Chen and Associates, Ms. Albright speaking." "Hello, my name is Chloe Redmond," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I received a letter from a Mr. David Chen." There was no surprise or confusion in the woman's voice. "Ah, yes, Ms. Redmond. We've been expecting your call. Mr. Chen has cleared his schedule for you. When would be a good time for you to travel to New York? We can have a car sent to you in Boston tomorrow morning and a suite booked at the St. Regis." The seamless efficiency of it all was disarming. This wasn't a mistake. They knew exactly who she was. Chloe, feeling as though she were moving through a dream, agreed to a meeting 2 days later. After she hung up, she sat in stunned silence. The world around her, the half-finished floral arrangements, the stack of unpaid invoices, the faint scent of wilted leaves seemed to fade into the background. For the first time since she saw Jared at the restaurant, a new feeling began to bloom in her chest, pushing aside the humiliation and despair. It was a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. She had no idea what was waiting for her in New York, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that her life was about to change forever. The Lincoln town car that arrived outside her modest apartment building was so black it seemed to absorb the morning light. The driver, a stoic man in a crisp suit, held the door for her as if she were royalty. The 2-hour journey to New York was a silent, surreal glide down the highway. Chloe stared out the window, the familiar New England landscape blurring past, feeling a profound sense of dislocation, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The offices of Chen and Associates were on the 40th floor of the MetLife building with a panoramic view of the city that made Chloe feel dizzy. The reception area was a study in understated power slate. Gray walls, a single dramatic orchid on a teak table, and the hushed, reverent silence of serious money. Ms. Albright, an impeccably dressed woman in her 50s, greeted her by name and led her down a long hallway to a corner office. David Chen rose from behind a vast mahogany desk as she entered. He was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes, a perfectly tailored gray suit, and an air of quiet authority. "Ms. Redmond, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, shaking her hand warmly. His grip was firm and reassuring. "Please have a seat. Can I get you some tea, coffee, water?" Chloe, feeling completely out of her depth, simply asked for water. As he poured it for her from a crystal carafe, she took in the office. It was filled with books, legal tomes mixed with classics of literature and philosophy. There were no flashy displays of wealth, only quality and substance. Mr. Chen, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I have to tell you, I think there's been a terrible mistake. I don't know anyone named Arthur Pemberton. David Chen smiled gently. He sat down opposite her in a plush leather armchair. I assure you, Ms. Redmond, there is no mistake. Arthur knew who you were, though I suspect you would have no reason to remember him. He leaned forward, his expression turning serious. Ms. Redmond, Arthur Pemberton passed away 2 weeks ago. I was his lawyer, his executor, and I'm honored to say his friend for over 40 years. He was a very private man. He had no living family, and in his last will and testament, which I have right here, he gestured to a thick leather-bound document on his desk. He named you as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. Chloe stared at him, uncomprehending. The words hung in the air, seeming to have no meaning. Sole beneficiary of his whole estate. Yes. But I read online. They said he was worth billions. The initial valuations are still underway, but yes, Mr. Chen said calmly. The liquid assets, stock portfolio, and real estate holdings of the Pemberton estate are valued at approximately $4.7 billion. This does not include Pemberton Industries itself, which is a privately held entity and valued considerably higher. The room began to spin. Chloe gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself. $4.7 billion. The number was so immense it was abstract, nonsensical. It was more money than she could possibly conceive of. Why, she finally whispered the word, catching in her throat. Why me? It makes no sense. Mr. Chen opened a folder on his lap. Arthur was a man who valued character above all else. He believed that small, unseen acts of kindness were the truest measure of a person. He instructed me to share a story with you, a memory he cherished. He began to read from a typed page. 5 years ago, on a Tuesday in October, there was a torrential downpour in Boston. An old man, frail and stubborn, had insisted on walking to the grocery store himself. On his way home, the paper bag soaked through and his groceries spilled all over the sidewalk. Cars splashed by, people hurried past under their umbrellas, ignoring him. The old man, soaked and shivering, was about to give up when a young woman pulled her car over. She got out in the rain without a coat and helped him gather every last item. She then insisted on driving him home, her car seats getting soaked. She helped him carry his groceries up 3 flights of stairs to his small, unassuming apartment. The old man, who looked like he didn't have 2 pennies to his name, offered her the $20 in his wallet. The young woman refused, simply saying, "Please just have a warm cup of tea and stay safe." She then left, never knowing who he was. Chloe's mind flashed back. She remembered it now. A rainy day, an old man with kind, tired eyes, a small, cluttered apartment that smelled of old books and Earl Grey tea. It was an insignificant event, an act of common decency she had performed and forgotten within the hour. "That was you, wasn't it, Ms. Redmond?" Mr. Chen asked softly. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes. "Yes, I remember him. I had no idea. That old man was Arthur Pemberton." Chen finished. He had a small apartment in Boston he used as a private refuge, a place no one knew about. He said in all his years, surrounded by people who wanted his money and his power, you were one of the only people who had ever shown him genuine, unprompted kindness with absolutely nothing to gain. He started following your life from a distance. He knew about your marriage to Jared Adler. He knew about the difficult divorce. He saw your resilience as you started your own business from scratch. He saw in you the integrity and strength he valued above all else. Chloe was speechless, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of emotion. This reclusive billionaire had been a silent observer of her life. "The inheritance is yours, Chloe," Mr. Chen said, using her first name for the first time. "The houses, the investments, the charitable foundation he established in your name. It's all yours." He paused, his expression becoming more complex. "However, there is one significant condition attached to the most valuable asset of all Pemberton Industries. A condition, yes. Arthur was a brilliant man, but he also held a grudge. His greatest business rival for decades was a man named Augustus Kane, the founder of Kane Global Enterprises. Arthur believed Kane was a ruthless, unethical man who prioritized profit over people. He spent years developing a revolutionary technology, a new form of decentralized sustainable energy grid he called Project Nightingale. It was his life's work, something he believed could change the world. He was months away from launching it when he fell ill. Mr. Chen looked her directly in the eyes. To inherit control of Pemberton Industries, you must personally oversee the successful launch of Project Nightingale within 1 year. And you must do so while fending off his rival. Augustus Kane is the primary investor and chairman of the board at the private equity firm where your ex-husband Jared Adler is now a partner. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't just a gift. It was a posthumous act of war, and Arthur Pemberton had just chosen her as his general. He was giving her not only the money to be free from Jared, but the weapon to destroy his entire world. The days that followed the meeting with David Chen were a disorienting whirlwind. Chloe felt like a diver who had surfaced too quickly, the world around her warped and unreal. One moment she was worrying about a $500 invoice for Dutch tulips. The next she was sitting in a bank boardroom with stern-faced financial advisors who used terms like asset allocation, trust structures, and diversified portfolios. The initial transfer of liquid assets to an account in her name was a string of numbers on a screen so long it looked like a programming error. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her independence, now felt claustrophobic and absurd. Mr. Chen's team had arranged for her to move into one of Arthur's properties for security reasons. A magnificent penthouse on Commonwealth Avenue overlooking the public garden. It was a world of polished marble floor-to-ceiling windows and silent, efficient staff. Chloe would often wake up in the middle of the night in the enormous king-size bed, her heart pounding, convinced it was all an elaborate dream. But it was the second part of her inheritance that truly consumed her, the challenge. Pemberton Industries. David Chen had hand-delivered a personal letter from Arthur written on his deathbed. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were forged in steel. Chloe, it began. If you are reading this, then I have passed on, and David has followed my instructions. I apologize for thrusting this upon you, but I do not believe in chance. The universe put you in my path on that rainy day, and I saw in you a strength you may not yet see in yourself. I am leaving you my company, not as a burden, but as a tool. Kane Global and the vultures who flock to it like your ex-husband represent everything I despise: greed without vision, ambition without soul. They would steal my technology, bastardize it for short-term profit, and crush the very spirit of innovation it represents. Project Nightingale is more than a product. It's a legacy. It is the culmination of my life's work. I am not asking you to be an engineer or a scientist. The teams I have in place are the best in the world. I am asking you to be its guardian. I am asking you to lead. Your kindness is not a weakness, as men like your ex-husband believe. It is your sharpest weapon. Do not let them win. Honor the spirit of the project, see it through, and the company and its future will be yours unconditionally. The letter settled something deep inside her. The fear began to recede, replaced by a nascent, steely resolve. This was her purpose. Arthur hadn't just given her an escape. He'd given her a mission. Her first day at the Pemberton Industries headquarters, a sprawling state-of-the-art campus of glass and steel just outside Boston, was terrifying. She traded her familiar jeans and sweaters for a tailored power suit selected by a personal stylist. As she walked through the atrium, a massive space with a living wall of green plants, she could feel the eyes of hundreds of employees on her. The whispers followed her. Who is she? Where did she come from? The boardroom was even more intimidating. It was filled with the company's senior executives, mostly men in their 50s and 60s, who had been loyal to Arthur for decades. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright suspicion. The COO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Barbara Vance, did not hide her apprehension. Ms. Redmond, Barbara began, her voice crisp. With all due respect, Mr. Pemberton was a singular genius. This company is a complex, multi-billion-dollar operation. Project Nightingale alone has over 1,000 moving parts. What qualifications do you possibly have to lead us? It was the question Chloe had been dreading, the one that echoed Jared's taunts. You were an anchor. You're not enough. Chloe took a deep breath, clutching the memory of Arthur's letter like a shield. She looked around the table, meeting each of their gazes. You're right, Ms. Vance, she said, her voice steady and clear. I am not a scientist. I am not an engineer. I can't tell you the difference between lithium-ion and solid-state batteries. My qualification is not on a resume. My qualification is that the man who built this entire company from the ground up, the genius you all respected, chose me. He didn't choose a seasoned CEO. He didn't choose a corporate raider. He chose me. He trusted me to be the guardian of his legacy, and I will not let him down. She leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. I'm not here to redesign your schematics. I'm here to empower you to do what you do best. My job is to protect this project, to provide you with every resource you need, and to fight the battles outside these walls so you can win the war inside them. Arthur Pemberton saw an enemy on the horizon in Kane Global and Jared Adler's firm. My single most important qualification is that I know that enemy better than any of you. A silence fell over the room. She had not been defensive. She had been direct. She had acknowledged her limitations but framed them as a unique strength. She saw a flicker of respect in Barbara Vance's eyes. It was a start. The transformation was grueling. Chloe spent the next few weeks in a crash course, working 18-hour days. She devoured briefing documents, financial reports, and technical summaries of Project Nightingale. She held one-on-one meetings with every department head, not pretending to understand their work, but asking them what they needed, what obstacles they faced, and who their best people were. She listened more than she talked. Slowly, she began to see the shape of the battlefield. Kane Global was already making moves, trying to poach key engineers and filing frivolous patent disputes to slow them down. Jared's firm was providing the financial muscle and the aggressive strategy. They were circling, waiting for the leaderless Pemberton Industries to falter. Chloe knew a quiet defense wouldn't be enough. Arthur wanted her to fight. She needed to make a move, something bold and decisive that would announce to the world and to Jared that Pemberton Industries was not adrift. It was under new and formidable command. For weeks, the financial world had been buzzing with rumors. The death of the reclusive Arthur Pemberton had left a massive power vacuum. Pemberton Industries, long a sleeping giant, was suddenly in play. Vultures like Augustus Kane circled, waiting for the estate to be carved up or for the company to be sold for parts. The identity of Pemberton's heir was the biggest mystery on Wall Street, a closely guarded secret by David Chen. Jared Adler followed the news with ravenous interest. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. With Kane's backing his firm, Apex Capital was preparing a hostile takeover bid. The crown jewel they were after was Pemberton's patent portfolio, especially the whispers of a game-changing energy project. The company is rudderless, Jared announced at an Apex Partners meeting, radiating confidence. He paced in front of a glass wall overlooking the Boston Harbor. Whoever the heir is, it's probably some distant, clueless relative who will take the first 9-figure check we slide across the table. We'll absorb their tech, fire half their staff, and triple our valuation inside of 2 years. Madison, who was waiting for him in his office, was less interested in the details and more in the results. So, does this mean we can finally close on the house in the Hamptons? She asked, scrolling through her phone. Baby, after this deal we can buy the whole damn Hamptons, Jared boasted, kissing her. He felt invincible. His invincibility lasted until the following Monday morning. He was sipping an espresso and scanning the Wall Street Journal when a headline made him choke. Pemberton Industries stuns market with $500 million acquisition of Cobalt X, exclusive supplier of ethically sourced cobalt. Jared's heart hammered against his ribs. Cobalt X was a crucial mining and refining company in the battery supply chain. Apex Capital had been in quiet, aggressive negotiations to acquire them for months. It was a linchpin of their strategy to control the resources needed for next-generation batteries, effectively kneecapping any competitor like Pemberton. Someone had outmaneuvered them, paying a 30% premium in an all-cash deal that had materialized over a single weekend. Someone had stolen their prize right from under their noses. Furious, he stormed into his office and got Augustus Kane on the phone. "Who the hell is running Pemberton?" Jared yelled. "Who is this new heir? We need a name. We're working on it." Kane's gravelly voice rasped from the speaker. "My sources say the board was just as surprised. This move was orchestrated entirely by the new owner. They're being very quiet." The mystery only fueled the market's excitement. The acquisition was seen as a brilliant, aggressive move, signaling that Pemberton Industries was not for sale. It was on the offensive. For Chloe, the decision had been a terrifying gamble. It was her first major act as the new head of the company. Barbara Vance and the finance team had advised against it, calling it an overpay. "It's not just about the cobalt, Barbara," Chloe had argued in a late-night strategy session. "It's about the message. We're drawing a line in the sand. We're telling Kane and we're telling my ex-husband that the days of Pemberton Industries being a passive player are over. We will not be hunted. We are the hunters now." She had authorized the deal, her hand shaking as she signed the documents that committed $500 million. 2 days later, she decided it was time to step out of the shadows. Pemberton Industries issued a formal press release officially announcing its new chairman and CEO. The news broke across every major financial news network. Jared was in a meeting when his phone began vibrating incessantly. He ignored it until his partner burst into the room, his face pale. "Jared, you need to see this." He handed Jared his tablet. On the screen was an article from Forbes. The headline read, "The mysterious heir, Chloe Redmond, takes the helm at Pemberton Industries, signals aggressive new direction." Beneath the headline was a picture of Chloe. It wasn't the timid, heartbroken woman he had last seen. This was a photo taken by a professional. She was standing in the atrium of the Pemberton headquarters, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit. Her hair was styled, her makeup was flawless, but it was her eyes that made Jared's blood run cold. They were filled with a calm, unyielding fire he had never seen before. He read her official statement. "I am honored to carry on Arthur Pemberton's legacy of innovation and integrity. Pemberton Industries will be investing heavily in the future, starting with the imminent launch of Project Nightingale, a technology that will reshape the global energy landscape. We welcome the competition." Jared felt the air leave his lungs. It was impossible. A prank. A nightmare. Chloe. His Chloe. The woman who organized charity bake sales and arranged flowers, running a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. He stumbled out of the meeting, his mind reeling. He got in his car and drove fast and reckless to the Pemberton headquarters. He didn't have a plan. He was fueled by pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He found her just as she was leaving for the day, stepping out of the main entrance and walking toward a waiting black Maybach, a car that made his Aston Martin look like a toy. "Chloe!" he yelled, his voice raw. She turned, her expression unreadable. She didn't look surprised to see him. She simply waited. "What is this?" he sputtered, gesturing wildly. "What kind of game are you playing? Did you win the lottery? Who are you sleeping with?" Chloe looked at him, not with the hurt or anger he expected, but with something that looked almost like pity. "It's no game, Jared," she said, her voice cool and even. "This is my company now. This is my life." "Your company? You couldn't even balance our checkbook," he scoffed, his voice dripping with the old familiar venom. "Who is Pemberton? How did you pull this off?" "He was a man who appreciated kindness," Chloe said simply. "Something you wouldn't understand. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board dinner to attend." She turned to get into her car. Jared, desperate and furious, grabbed her arm. "You think you can just waltz in and play CEO? You think you can go up against me and Augustus Kane? We will crush you. We will bury you in this entire company." Chloe slowly turned her head, her eyes locking onto his hand on her arm. She didn't flinch. She just stared at it until he, unnerved by her utter lack of fear, let go. "You know Jared?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "For the longest time I believed you when you said I was an anchor. But I've come to realize something. I wasn't the anchor. I was the harbor. I was the safe place you came back to while you were building your little pirate ship. The thing is, the harbor is stationary. It's safe. But a ship without a harbor, sooner or later, it gets lost in a storm." Without another word, she slipped into the back seat of the Maybach. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, and the car pulled away, leaving Jared standing alone in the parking lot, choking on the dust of his own shattered reality. The war had begun. The battle between Pemberton Industries and the Apex Kane Alliance escalated into a full-blown corporate war. It was fought not with armies, but with algorithms, lawyers, and public relations firms. Jared, fueled by a toxic cocktail of wounded pride and avarice, came at Chloe with everything he had. He launched a smear campaign in the financial press, feeding anonymous sources to reporters who wrote scathing articles questioning Chloe's competence. They painted her as an unqualified heiress, a lucky fool in over her head, and predicted the imminent collapse of Pemberton Industries under her naive leadership. He hired away 2 of Pemberton's mid-level engineers, hoping to gain insider knowledge about Project Nightingale. He filed a dozen frivolous lawsuits challenging old patents and supply contracts designed to bleed Chloe's company of time and money. But he underestimated her. And he drastically underestimated the loyalty Arthur Pemberton had inspired. The core team at Pemberton, now fiercely protective of Chloe, rallied around her. Barbara Vance, the once skeptical COO, became her most trusted lieutenant, working tirelessly to counter Jared's moves. They fought the lawsuits, shored up employee morale, and under Chloe's direction accelerated the timeline for Project Nightingale. Chloe proved to be a natural leader, not because she was a technical expert, but because she understood people. She remembered the names of the security guards, ate lunch in the main cafeteria, and listened to the concerns of the junior programmers. She fostered a culture of collaborative innovation that stood in stark contrast to the cutthroat environment at Apex Capital. Despite their strong defense, the pressure was immense. Kane Global had deep pockets, and Jared's aggression was relentless. He seemed to anticipate some of their moves as if he had a source inside their walls. A key supplier negotiation would suddenly fall through. A strategic partner would back out at the last minute for a better offer from Apex. Chloe and Barbara began to suspect a leak. The stress was taking a toll on Jared, too. His obsession with destroying Chloe became all-consuming. He was constantly on the phone, barking at lawyers, traders, and his new fiancée. The carefree, triumphant man Madison Cole had attached herself to was being replaced by a paranoid, angry workaholic. The shopping sprees became less frequent, the romantic dinners non-existent. Their luxury lifestyle, which she had considered a permanent state, now felt precarious, tied entirely to this vindictive war against his ex-wife. Madison was no fool. She had chosen Jared for his success, for the security and status he provided. She watched him pour millions of Apex's and by extension Kane's money into this personal vendetta with diminishing returns. She also watched Chloe. She saw her on the cover of Wired magazine, profiled as a new titan of tech. She saw paparazzi shots of her leaving charity galas looking poised and powerful. She saw the Pemberton Industries stock, which had been listed on a private exchange, steadily climbing. Madison did the math. Jared was fighting a war against a woman who had more money, more public goodwill, and a revolutionary product. He was losing, and if he lost, she lost. The Birkin bags, the apartment on Beacon Hill, the promise of a house in the Hamptons, it would all evaporate. Self-preservation. Her sharpest instinct kicked in. One evening, Chloe was working late with Barbara and her head of security, a former FBI agent named Frank. They were trying to find the source of the leak. "It has to be someone at the executive level," Frank said, pointing to a diagram of their internal communications. "The information he's getting is too specific." Just then, Chloe's personal assistant buzzed her. "Ma'am, you have an anonymous call on your private line. The person refuses to give a name but says it's about Apex Capital. Chloe hesitated, then nodded. Put it through. She put the phone on speaker. A woman's voice, digitally disguised but recognizably female, came through the line. Is this Chloe Redmond? It is. Who is this? Let's just say I'm a concerned party. I have information about Apex Capital's strategy regarding Project Nightingale. They found a potential vulnerability in your supply chain, a microchip manufacturer in Taiwan. They're planning a corporate raid next week to acquire a controlling interest and cut you off completely. Chloe, Barbara, and Frank stared at each other in stunned silence. This was the exact move they had been wargaming as Jared's most devastating potential attack. Why are you telling me this? Chloe asked, her mind racing. Jared Adler is reckless, the voice said, a hint of genuine anger seeping through the digital filter. He's going to run that company and my investment into the ground with this stupid obsession. I prefer to back the winning horse. There's a data file being sent to you now through an encrypted channel. It has everything. Apex's internal memos, their offer sheet for the manufacturer, everything. Use it well. The line went dead. A moment later, a file appeared on Chloe's laptop. Frank immediately set to work verifying its authenticity and scrubbing it for malware. It's real, he announced 20 minutes later, his eyes wide. My God, this is their entire playbook for the next 6 months. Barbara looked at Chloe. This changes everything. We can preempt every move they make. We can set traps. We can crush them. Chloe felt a chill. She knew with absolute certainty who the anonymous caller was. The reference to my investment was the tell. Madison wasn't invested in Apex Capital. She was invested in the lifestyle it provided. She had seen the writing on the wall and had decided to switch her allegiance to the new nexus of power. She was betraying Jared to secure her own future. It was a ruthless, cynical move, and it was the most powerful weapon Chloe had been handed yet. She looked at the files on her screen, a ghost in Jared's machine sent by the woman who was sleeping in his bed. All right, Chloe said, a hard edge to her voice. Let's get to work. It's time to stop playing defense. Armed with Madison's intel, Chloe and her team didn't just counter Jared's attacks. They turned them into traps. When Apex's raiders went to Taiwan to buy the microchip company, they found that Pemberton Industries had already acquired it 2 days prior using an offshore shell corporation. When Jared tried to poach their head of marketing, he discovered the man had already signed a new ironclad contract with a bonus that dwarfed Apex's offer, a negotiation prompted by Chloe's foreknowledge. For every punch Jared threw, Chloe was already there holding a granite wall. His frustration grew into paranoia. He accused his partners of incompetence, his lawyers of ineptitude. He couldn't understand how she was always one step ahead. The atmosphere at Apex Capital grew toxic, and investors, including the notoriously impatient Augustus Kane, began to get nervous. The culmination of it all was the launch of Project Nightingale. Chloe orchestrated an event that was part tech conference, part World Fair. She invited scientists, government officials, and press from all over the globe to the Pemberton campus. The centerpiece of the presentation was a live demonstration, a miniature self-sustaining town on the campus grounds, powered entirely and independently by the Nightingale grid. It was a stunning, undeniable success. As the news went viral, Pemberton's private valuation skyrocketed. Governments and multinational corporations immediately began inquiries about licensing the technology. Project Nightingale wasn't just a product, it was a paradigm shift. Chloe, standing on the stage delivering a speech about a future of clean, accessible energy for all, was no longer just an heiress. She was a visionary. For Jared, the news was a death knell. As Pemberton's star ascended, Apex's plummeted. Their investors saw that they had bet on the wrong horse in the energy race. Augustus Kane, in a brutal, decisive move, called an emergency board meeting. He personally orchestrated the vote to remove Jared as partner, citing his reckless and value-destroying vendetta. He was forced to sell his shares at a catastrophic loss to cover the firm's debts. Within 48 hours, Jared Adler was ruined. He lost his job, his partnership, and the vast majority of his wealth. The creditors came for the Aston Martin first. Then came the notice of foreclosure on his penthouse. The final betrayal came from Madison. The moment the news of Jared's ousting broke, she packed her bags, the expensive ones he'd bought for her, and left. She sent him a simple text. "Sorry, Jared. I can't do this. I wish you the best." She was already in talks with a divorce lawyer to see what she could get from their brief engagement. Broken, humiliated, and alone, Jared did the one thing he could think of. He drove his rented sedan to the one place he knew he could find Chloe, her old apartment. He didn't know why he went there, but it was the only place that felt real. He found her there packing up the last of her personal belongings into boxes. She had kept the apartment, using it as a quiet place to think. She saw him through the window, and after a moment's hesitation, let him in. He was a ghost of the man who had mocked her at Aurelia. His expensive suit was rumpled. His face was pale, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. "They're gone, Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Everything. The firm, the money. Madison. It's all gone." Chloe continued placing books into a box, her movements calm and deliberate. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jared." "Sorry?" He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "You did this. You planned this all along, didn't you? This elaborate revenge fantasy?" Chloe finally stopped and looked at him. "No, Jared, you did this. This was never about revenge for me. This was about survival. It was about building something, not tearing someone down. You were just an obstacle my benefactor wanted cleared from the path." Desperation made him change tactics. He softened his voice, trying to conjure the ghost of the man she had once loved. "Chloe, remember us. Remember what we had. It was real. I was stupid. I was arrogant. I lost my way. But I never stopped loving you." He took a step towards her, his hands outstretched. "We can start again. You have everything. We could have everything." It was the most pathetic, transparent plea she had ever heard, and she felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity. Just a profound sense of distance, as if she were looking at a stranger. "The best thing you ever did for me, Jared, was leaving me," she said, her voice soft but final. "You thought you were setting yourself free, but you were setting me free. Free to discover what I was capable of without you telling me I was worthless." She paused, then delivered the final quiet blow. "By the way, you should know that your biggest leak wasn't in your company. It was in your bedroom. Madison was my anonymous source for the last 6 months. She knew you were sinking the ship, and she just wanted a new lifeboat." The last vestiges of color drained from Jared's face. The knowledge that he had been betrayed by both the woman he left and the woman he chose completely shattered him. Chloe picked up a box labeled Memories. She walked to the door and held it open. "Goodbye, Jared. I hope you find your way, but my harbor is closed for good." He stumbled out into the hallway, a broken man with nothing left but the consequences of his own cruelty. Chloe closed the door, leaning against it for a long moment. She didn't feel a surge of victory. She simply felt free. The storm had passed. Her journey hadn't been about a billionaire's inheritance or corporate warfare. It had been about finding the person she was meant to be, a person who had been there all along, just waiting for the anchor to be lifted. And as she looked around the small apartment where her new life had begun, she smiled. It was time to go build the future. And that's where Chloe's story truly begins. Not with the signing of a check, but with the closing of a door on her past. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by the people who leave us, but by the strength we find within ourselves when we're forced to stand alone. Sometimes the greatest acts of kindness we perform are for strangers, and we never know how or when that compassion will come back to us, often in the most unexpected and life-altering ways. Jared thought wealth was about what you could buy, But Chloe learned it was about what you could build. What did you think of Chloe's journey? Was Jared's downfall deserved, or was Madison the true villain of the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of vindication and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.
The flashbulbs were a symphony of adoration, and Bentley Ashford was its conductor. Each blinding pop was a note of validation, a testament to his arrival. On his arm, Isabella Monroe was the perfect accessory, a goddess sculpted from victory and silk, her youth a vibrant contrast to the life he'd left behind. He smirked, the familiar curl of triumph on his lips. This wasn't just an awards night, it was his coronation. He had shed his past, his mousy, unassuming ex-wife, and emerged reborn in the crucible of public acclaim. Tonight, he would not only claim his trophy, but also show the world, and most importantly her, that leaving him was the greatest mistake of her life. He was the victor. He was the headline. The air in the grand ballroom of the Carlisle Hotel was thick with the scent of money, ambition, and expensive perfume. It was the night of the 85th Annual Golden Quill Awards, the most prestigious literary event of the year, where authors were treated like movie stars and words were weighed in gold. Bentley Ashford breathed it all in a deep, satisfying gulp of the atmosphere he now considered his birthright. His novel, Echoes of a Faded Dawn, was the literary darling of the season, a sprawling, melancholic masterpiece that critics had hailed as a once-in-a-generation voice. He was the frontrunner for the coveted fiction prize, the pinnacle of authorial achievement. He ran a hand over the lapel of his Tom Ford tuxedo, the fabric smooth and impossibly black. Beside him, Isabella squeezed his arm, her smile as bright and dazzling as the diamond necklace gracing her collarbone. "They're all looking at you, darling," she murmured, her voice a low, sultry purr. "Let them look," Bentley replied, his voice laced with a practiced, casual arrogance. He scanned the room, a king surveying his court. He saw Jonathan Franzen holding court in a corner, Zadie Smith engaged in animated conversation near the bar, and Stephen King, looking surprisingly unassuming, chatting with a group of publicists. These were his peers now. He belonged here. The past 18 months had been a whirlwind of calculated brilliance. He'd left Liliana, his wife of 12 years, with a single clinical conversation in their book-filled, slightly worn-out brownstone. The reason he'd given her was a cliché, wrapped in intellectualism. "We've diverged, Elle. Our creative and personal energies are no longer aligned." The truth, of course, was Isabella. He'd met her at a university guest lecture. She was a graduate student, 24 years old, with wide, adoring eyes and an insatiable appetite for the life he could offer. She saw him not as Bentley, the man who struggled with deadlines and left his socks on the floor, but as Bentley Ashford, the literary genius. She was a reflection of the man he wanted to be, and he'd chosen the reflection over the reality. Liliana had taken it with a quiet, devastating stillness that had unnerved him more than any screaming match would have. She had simply packed her bags, her face pale and her eyes hollow, and disappeared from his life. Their divorce was swift and quiet, handled by lawyers. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out of New York, somewhere upstate, to find herself, or some other such nonsense. He pictured her in a small, sad cottage, surrounded by cats, growing bitter and irrelevant. The thought gave him a small, dark thrill of satisfaction. He had been the sun in their shared universe, and without him, she was surely just a cold, forgotten rock. "There's Charles Kensington from the New York Times," Isabella whispered, nudging him slightly. "He gave you that rave review. You should go say hello." "In a moment," Bentley said, his eyes still scanning. He was a shark, and this room was his ocean. Every handshake, every nod, every shared laugh was a strategic move. He was building his brand, cementing his legacy. The award tonight would be the final immutable stone in the foundation of his new life. He and Isabella began their slow, deliberate procession through the room. Hands were shaken, backs were slapped, compliments were exchanged like currency. Bentley was charming, witty, and self-deprecating, in just the right measure, a performance he had honed to perfection. Isabella was his silent, beautiful echo, smiling graciously, her presence a constant, glittering reminder of his virility and success. "Bentley, my boy," a booming voice called out. It was Arthur Mason, his former father-in-law, and ironically, the head of the Mason publishing house, which had not published Echoes of a Faded Dawn. Arthur was a man built like a bulldog, with a gruff exterior that hid a shrewd business mind. "Arthur," Bentley said, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Good to see you." Arthur's eyes flickered to Isabella, a quick, dismissive glance before settling back on Bentley. "Quite a night for you. I read the book. Powerful stuff." "Thank you, Arthur. That means a lot." "Yes, well," Arthur grunted, taking a sip of his scotch. "It had a familiar rhythm to it, a certain cadence. Reminded me of some of Liliana's early prose, back when she used to write." Bentley felt a flash of ice in his veins. He forced a laugh. "Liliana. Oh, she was a wonderful editor, a great first reader, but she never had the patience for the long haul. She was a sprinter, not a marathon runner." It was a line he'd used before. It neatly packaged Liliana's abandoned creative ambitions into a tidy, dismissible box. Arthur just grunted again, his gaze unreadable. "Well, enjoy your night, Bentley. You've certainly worked hard to get here." The words were polite, but the tone felt like sandpaper. Arthur turned and walked away, leaving Bentley feeling strangely exposed. "What was that about?" Isabella asked, a slight frown marring her perfect brow. "He seemed odd." "He's old school," Bentley said, waving a dismissive hand. "Still bitter I didn't sign with his house. And he's Liliana's father. Familial loyalty and all that." He quickly steered her toward the bar, eager to wash the taste of the encounter away with champagne. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests began to move towards their assigned tables. Bentley and Isabella were seated at a prime spot right near the stage, sharing a table with his agent, his publicist, and the editor-in-chief of a major magazine. The buzz in the room was electric, a collective hum of anticipation. Bentley felt his heart begin to beat a little faster. This was it, the culmination of everything. He reached under the table and squeezed Isabella's knee. She looked at him, her eyes shining. "You're going to win," she mouthed. He knew she was right. He leaned back in his chair, a picture of confidence, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had it all: the woman, the fame, the masterpiece. He was untouchable. He thought for a fleeting second of Liliana in her sad little cottage. He hoped with a savage sort of pity that she was watching the live stream, that she was witnessing his ascent. He hoped it was destroying her. It was then that a subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. A quiet murmur started near the grand entrance, a ripple that spread outwards table by table. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The focused energy of the room suddenly found a new, singular focal point. Bentley followed the collective gaze, annoyed at the interruption. What could possibly be more important than the start of the ceremony? And then he saw her. The doors were being held open by two staff members, and framed in the doorway was a woman. No, not just a woman. She was a vision. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light falling from her shoulders in a cascade of liquid elegance. A constellation of sapphires and diamonds glittered at her throat. Her hair, which he remembered as a simple shoulder-length brown, was now a rich, dark auburn swept up in an intricate style that showcased the elegant line of her neck. But it was her face that made the air leave Bentley's lungs. The features were the same, but they were rearranged, sharpened by a confidence so profound It was almost a physical force. The hesitant uncertainty he had known was gone, replaced by a cool, placid serenity. Her smile was small, subtle, but it held a universe of secrets. It was Liliana. His Liliana. But it was not. It was a complete stranger, wearing his ex-wife's face. The room was filled with a stunned, reverent silence, punctuated by the frantic, sudden explosion of flashbulbs from the paparazzi who had scrambled back to the entrance. They had missed her on the red carpet, a cardinal sin they were now desperately trying to rectify. Bentley sat frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. He felt Isabella stiffen beside him. Who is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and dawning apprehension. Bentley couldn't answer. His throat was a desert. His world, so perfectly constructed, so solid and certain just moments before, had developed a hairline crack. And then he saw the man whose hand she was holding. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke suit that was the epitome of understated power. His face was sharp, intelligent, with piercing grey eyes, and a stillness that commanded attention more than any boisterous display ever could. Bentley recognized him instantly, not from literary circles, but from the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. It was Damien Blackwood, the Damien Blackwood, the reclusive, mysterious tech billionaire, the man who had revolutionized data encryption, who owned half of Silicon Valley, and whose net worth was a figure with so many zeros it seemed fictional. A man who never attended public events. Ever. And he was here at the Golden Quill Awards holding Liliana Mason's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and Liliana laughed. It wasn't the quiet, breathy laugh he remembered. It was a full, melodious sound that seemed to fill the sudden silence in the room. The crack in Bentley's world widened into a chasm. This was impossible. This was a hallucination. Liliana, his quiet, mousy, irrelevant Liliana with Damien Blackwood. The narrative he had so carefully written for himself, the story of his triumph and her lonely demise, had just been ripped to shreds in front of the entire world, and on the biggest night of his life. The maitre d', flustered and awed, rushed forward to greet the couple. As they were led into the room, every eye followed them. No one was looking at Bentley Ashford anymore. The conductor had lost his orchestra. The spotlight hadn't just moved, it had been stolen by a ghost from his past resurrected and shining with a brilliance he could never have imagined. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing, a palpable pressure that had replaced the earlier buzz of excitement. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike when the world holds its breath, waiting for the thunder. Bentley felt it in his chest, a heavy, suffocating weight. His mind, usually a rapid-fire processor of wit and strategy, was a blank, static-filled screen. Liliana and Damien Blackwood moved through the room with an unhurried grace that only amplified their magnetic pull. They weren't just walking, they were gliding on a current of their own making. The whispers started then, a sibilant tide rising in their wake. "Is that Damien Blackwood? What is he doing here? And who is she? She's stunning. Wait, that's Liliana Mason, Bentley Ashford's ex-wife." That last exclamation, uttered by a well-known gossip columnist at a nearby table, was a gunshot in the quiet room. Heads swiveled from Liliana back to Bentley, their expressions a cocktail of shock, pity, and delicious Schadenfreude-fueled curiosity. Bentley felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, dissecting his reaction. He felt his face flush a hot, creeping tide of humiliation. He was no longer the man of the hour. He was a spectacle, a supporting character in a drama he hadn't known was being written. "Bentley," Isabella hissed, her voice sharp with panic. Her hand was gripping his thigh under the table, her nails digging into the fine wool of his trousers. "What is going on? Why is she here with him?" "I don't know." Bentley managed to choke out the words, tasting like ash. He took a gulp of his champagne, but it did nothing to quench the fire in his throat. The maitre d' was leading Liliana and Damien to a table. Not just any table. It was a specially prepared table for two, placed in a prime location that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. It was a power move so blatant and yet so elegant that it was breathtaking. They hadn't come to fit into the evening. The evening was reforming around them. Damien pulled out Liliana's chair, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed utterly natural. As she sat, her midnight blue gown pooling around her, she let her gaze drift across the room. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, her eyes met Bentley's. There was no anger in her look, no hatred, no pain. There was something far worse, a calm, dispassionate assessment, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture or a distant, uninteresting memory. In that single glance, she dismissed 12 years of their shared life. She saw him, the man who had shattered her heart, and she looked right through him as if he were made of glass. Then she turned her attention to Damien, a warm, genuine smile gracing her lips, and Bentley Ashford ceased to exist for her. The thunder that followed the lightning strike was the collective exhale of the room, the immediate eruption of frantic, hushed conversation. Phones were already emerging from beneath tablecloths. The story of the night had irrevocably changed. It was no longer Bentley Ashford, literary genius, poised to win, and it was now billionaire recluse Damien Blackwood makes shock public appearance with mystery woman, the ex-wife of his award-nominated rival. Bentley could already see the headlines, the salacious blog posts, the endless social media commentary. His publicist, a harried-looking woman named Chloe, leaned across the table, her face pale. Bentley, just stay calm. Don't react. We can manage this. Manage what? Bentley snapped, his voice louder than he intended. Manage the fact that my ex-wife just showed up with a man who could buy this entire hotel with his pocket change and is currently sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Keep your voice down, his agent, Marcus, cautioned, his eyes darting around nervously. This is a bad look, Bentley. A very bad look. Isabella was silent, her face a mask of confusion and betrayal. She had signed on to be the girlfriend of the triumphant victor, the star of the show. Instead, she was now the other woman, in a public humiliation. Her role had been downgraded from leading lady to a tawdry footnote. She looked from Bentley's angry, blotchy face to Liliana's serene, luminous one, and a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or dawning comprehension crossed her features. The lights dimmed further, and a spotlight hit the stage. The host, a famous comedian known for his sharp wit, walked out to the podium. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Golden Quill Awards. We have a lot of literary talent in the room tonight, and apparently... He paused, letting his eyes drift pointedly towards Damien Blackwood's table. Some serious venture capital, too. I guess the rumor is true, the publishing industry really is looking for a new business model. A wave of laughter, slightly strained, rippled through the room. The host had acknowledged the elephant, and in doing so, had cemented its importance. Bentley wanted to slide under the table. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The ceremony began, but the proceedings were a blur to Bentley. Awards were given for poetry, for biography, for debut novel. Winners gave heartfelt, emotional speeches, but the room's attention was divided. Every few minutes, a surreptitious glance would be thrown toward Liliana and Damien's table. They seemed oblivious, lost in their own world. They spoke quietly. He would occasionally reach across and touch her hand, and they shared a bottle of wine that had been brought specifically for them, its label one. Bentley had only ever read about. He couldn't focus. The words of the speakers turned into a meaningless drone. The applause was a distant roar. His mind was a maelstrom of rage, jealousy, and a terrifying, unfamiliar feeling of helplessness. How had this happened? The Liliana he knew was quiet, intellectual, and deeply insecure about her place in the world. She was the one who edited his manuscripts, who organized his research, who reminded him of appointments. She was the scaffolding that held up his genius essential, but meant to be unseen. The woman across the room was a different species entirely. She radiated a confidence that came from deep within, a self-possession that no amount of money or fame could buy. It was the one thing he could never give her, because his own confidence was a fragile construct built on external validation. He remembered her writing. Arthur was right. There was a cadence in echoes of a faded dawn that was hers. He'd always told himself he was simply inspired by her, that he was elevating her raw, unformed ideas into true art. He'd read her journals, her abandoned short stories, absorbing her unique way of seeing the world, of phrasing a feeling. He saw it as a collaboration, albeit an uncredited one. He was the artist, she was the muse. But now, looking at the woman she had become, a dark, venomous thought slithered into his mind. What if he had it backwards? What if he was the parasite and she was the host? He pushed the thought away violently. It was absurd. He was the genius. The critics had said so. The next award, the presenter on stage announced, is for the highest honor in American letters, the Golden Quill for fiction. This was it, the main event. Chloe put a reassuring hand on his arm. Breathe, Bentley. This is your moment. No matter what else is happening, this is yours. Bentley straightened his tie and tried to compose his features into an expression of humble anticipation. He felt Isabella's hand, cold and clammy, find his again. The nominees were read aloud. His name was last met with strong, enthusiastic applause, though it felt muted compared to the buzz that still surrounded Liliana's presence. The camera panned to his face. He smiled a tight, forced grimace he hoped looked genuine. The presenter, a celebrated actress with an Oscar on her mantle, tore open the envelope. The silence stretched thick and heavy. And the Golden Quill goes to... Bentley held his breath. His entire future, his entire sense of self, hung on the next few words. Catherine Park, for the last embers of winter. The world went white. For a moment there was no sound, only a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The applause that erupted for the other author felt like a physical blow. He saw Catherine Park, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 60s, gasp and cover her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Her table erupted in joy. His table was Sant. Chloe's hand fell from his arm. Marcus stared at the stage, his face grim. Isabella simply let go of his hand, her touch retreating as if he were suddenly contagious. Bentley clapped. He had to. He was on camera. The motion was mechanical, wooden. His face felt like a plaster mask that was about to crack. He had lost. On the night his ex-wife had returned from the dead to publicly humiliate him, he had lost. It wasn't just a defeat. It was an annihilation. His eyes against his will were drawn back to Liliana's table. She was politely applauding the winner, a small, serene smile on her face. She hadn't even looked at him. His failure was as irrelevant to her as his success would have been. Damien Blackwood leaned over and offered her his arm. She took it, and together they stood up. They had no reason to stay. They hadn't come for the awards. They had come for something else entirely. As they began to walk towards the exit long before the ceremony was over, they passed his table. For a moment, Liliana was only a few feet away from him. He could smell her perfume, a subtle, complex scent of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. Nothing like the simple lavender soap she used to wear. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at Isabella. Her gaze was fixed forward. But as she passed, she turned her head slightly, and her eyes met Isabella's. It was a fleeting look, but it was filled with a universe of meaning. It wasn't a look of triumph or pity. It was a look of profound quiet, almost sorrowful understanding. It was a look that said, I know him, and I am so sorry you have to learn what I already know. And then she was gone, a phantom of midnight silk and diamonds, leaving a trail of shattered expectations and whispered questions in her wake. Bentley Ashford was left sitting in the glare of the stage lights, a loser at a table of ghosts, the deafening sound of another woman's victory speech echoing in the ruins of his perfect night. The remainder of the awards ceremony was a slow, agonizing torture. Bentley sat through the final speeches and the closing remarks, a frozen smile plastered on his face, while a black hole of rage and humiliation churned in his gut. The air at his table was thick with unspoken condolences and the stench of failure. His agent Marcus avoided his eyes, furiously typing on his phone, likely already in damage control mode. Chloe, his publicist, kept offering him water with a funereal solemnity. Isabella was a statue of ice beside him. She had withdrawn completely, her vibrant energy extinguished. The diamond necklace that had looked so triumphant earlier now seemed like a glittering noose around her neck. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and the reality of her predicament was dawning on her in real time, in a ballroom filled with the most influential people in their world. When the ceremony finally ended and the lights came up, a cage of politeness descended. People from other tables began to approach. Tough break, Bentley. Catherine's book was a surprise, but a worthy one. You were robbed, Ashford. Absolutely robbed. Better luck next time. Echoes was a masterpiece. The words were meaningless platitudes, the social lubricant required to move past an awkward moment. Bentley knew what they were really thinking, what they would whisper about the moment they were out of earshot. They weren't just talking about him losing the award, they were talking about him losing everything. He had been publicly upstaged, cuckolded, not by a rival author, but by a titan of industry, and his carefully crafted persona had been shattered. The after-party was being held in an adjacent salon, a swirl of jazz music, clinking glasses and loud relieved chatter. Normally, Bentley would have been in his element here holding court, accepting congratulations. Tonight, the thought of entering that room felt like marching to his own execution. I'm not going, he said to Marcus, his voice low and tight. You have to, Marcus insisted, his face strained. If you disappear, you look weak. You have to go in there, hold your head high, congratulate Catherine Park, and act like you don't have a care in the world. It's the only play we have. Isabella finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. I have a headache. I think I'm going to go home. She didn't look at him. She was already detaching, creating distance. Fine. Bentley snapped his control, fraying. Go. He didn't care. At that moment, she was just another part of the evening's spectacular failure. She flinched as if he'd struck her, then turned and walked away without another word, melting into the crowd, heading for the coat check. Her retreat was another public wound, another drop of blood in the water, for the sharks to scent. Steeling himself, Bentley followed Marcus towards the after-party. As he stepped through the archway, a wall of noise and forced merriment hit him. He felt intensely conspicuous, as if a spotlight was following him, illuminating his shame. And then he saw them. They hadn't left the hotel. Liliana and Damien Blackwood were in a secluded alcove of the salon, speaking with a small select group of people. Bentley recognized them instantly. Michael Linton, the chairman of a major Hollywood studio, and Ari Emanuel, the notoriously powerful CEO of the talent agency WME. This wasn't a social call. This was a business meeting disguised as a casual chat. The sight sent a fresh wave of venom through Bentley's veins. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a random act of revenge. This was a strategic, calculated strike. She hadn't come here just to upstage him. She had used his night, the platform he had built, as a launchpad for her own ambitions. She was leveraging the attention, the buzz, the sheer shock of her appearance with Damien Blackwood to make deals with the most powerful men in entertainment. He couldn't stand it. The injustice, the sheer audacity of it was more than he could bear. His ego, bruised and bleeding, demanded action. He needed to reassert control, to puncture the serene, untouchable bubble she had created around herself. Ignoring Marcus's frantic whispered, "Bentley, don't!" He broke away and began to walk towards the alcove. As he approached, the conversation paused. Four pairs of intensely powerful eyes turned to him. Michael Linton and Ari Emanuel looked at him with mild professional curiosity. Damian Blackwood's grey eyes were cool and unreadable, as impenetrable as a fortress wall. Liliana's expression was one of mild, weary surprise, as if she were spotting a persistent insect she thought she'd already swatted away. "Bentley," she said, her voice even. There was no warmth in it, just acknowledgement. "Liliana." He began, forcing a smile that felt like a snarl. "I must say I'm surprised to see you. I didn't think literary awards were quite your scene anymore. I pictured you more upstate, with a garden." He gestured vaguely, trying to paint a picture of the quaint, irrelevant life he had imagined for her. Liliana's smile didn't waver. "People change, Bentley, and gardens require patience. It turns out my talents were better suited to a different kind of cultivation." Her eyes flickered briefly towards Damien and the other men. Bentley pressed on, fueled by a desperate need to land a blow. "And you've certainly found a powerful benefactor." He let the word hang in the air, weighted with insinuation. He glanced at Damien Blackwood, a direct challenge. "Damien, an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you were a connoisseur of modern fiction." Damien Blackwood didn't rise to the bait. He simply inclined his head slightly. "I'm a connoisseur of brilliance, Mr. Ashford, in any form it takes." His gaze rested on Liliana with an admiration so genuine it made Bentley's stomach clench. "And Liliana is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met." The compliment was delivered with such quiet sincerity that it completely disarmed Bentley's insinuation. It wasn't a boast, it was a statement of fact. Bentley turned his attention back to Liliana, his voice dripping with condescension. "Well, I'm glad to see you've landed on your feet. After everything, I was worried." This finally seemed to elicit a flicker of a real emotion from her, a spark of something that looked like pity. "You were never worried, Bentley," she said, her voice soft, but carrying a devastating clarity. "You were relieved, there's a difference." The truth of it hit him like a punch to the gut. Michael Linton and Ari Emanuel were now watching the exchange with undisguised interest, their predator's instincts sensing a story far more compelling than any manuscript. "I only ever wanted what was best for you," Bentley lied, trying to regain his footing. "No," Liliana corrected him gently. "You only ever wanted what was best for you. You just needed me to believe it was for me. It was a neat trick. For a while." She paused, then delivered the killing blow, a verbal coup de grace. "The thing you never understood, Bentley, is that I wasn't the scaffolding holding you up. I was the foundation. And when I left, I took it with me. I just hope for your sake that what you built on top of it isn't as hollow as I suspect it is." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. She had just articulated his deepest, most terrifying fear and laid it bare in front of these titans of industry. The cadence, she had mentioned the familiar rhythm Arthur Mason had noted. It was all tied up in that one word, hollow. He was speechless. His wit, his arrogance, his entire arsenal of verbal weaponry was gone. He was standing there, exposed and empty-handed. Damien Blackwood stepped forward slightly, a subtle but unmistakable move to end the conversation. "Gentlemen," he said to Linton and Emmanuel, his voice calm and commanding, "I believe we were discussing the film rights." Film rights. The words barely registered. "Bentley," Damien said, his grey eyes finally locking onto his with a chilling intensity. "Congratulations on your nomination. It's a significant achievement, to be recognized for your work." It was the most brutal insult of the night. The bland, polite, utterly dismissive congratulations of a superior being. He was swatting Bentley away, not with anger, but with indifference. He was dismissing him as a minor nuisance, a footnote to their far more important conversation. Bentley felt a hot flush of shame so intense it was dizzying. He had come over to reclaim his power to inflict a wound, and instead He had been dismantled piece by piece with surgical precision. He hadn't just lost the battle, he had been erased from the war. He mumbled something incoherent, a pathetic excuse for a retreat, and turned. As he walked away, he heard Ari Emanuel's distinct, gravelly voice pick up the conversation as if he'd never been there. "So about the protagonist," Ari said. "The story of a woman finding her voice after being silenced. It's powerful. We see a major star in the role. The narrative arc is incredible." Bentley froze. They weren't talking about his book. They were talking about hers, about her life, about the story he had tried so hard to erase. His humiliation was now complete. He was not only the villain in her story, he was a footnote in the lucrative deal being made about it. He stumbled through the crowd blind to the faces deaf to the music and fled the party, escaping into the cold, indifferent New York night. The next morning, Bentley awoke to the aggressive grey light of a New York hangover. His head throbbed in time with the city's distant sirens. The tuxedo from the night before was crumpled in a heap on the floor of his sterile minimalist apartment, an apartment he'd chosen specifically because it was the aesthetic opposite of the warm, cluttered brownstone he had shared with Liliana. Isabella was gone. There was no note, just an empty space on the pillow beside him, and the faint, lingering scent of her perfume, a ghost of his failed triumph. He stumbled to the kitchen and fumbled with the espresso machine, his hands shaking. He needed caffeine, but what he really craved was validation. He needed to see his name in print, to see the narrative of the night spun in his favor. Perhaps some critics would argue he was robbed. Perhaps the focus would be on his literary merits, not the red carpet drama. With a trembling finger, he tapped open the browser on his phone. The New York Times, the arts section. The headline was a punch to the face. Blackwood's surprise appearance at Golden Quills fuels Hollywood speculation. Liliana Mason, ex-wife of nominee Ashford at center of mystery deal. His name was there, but only as a subordinate clause, a piece of identifying information for the real star of the story, Liliana. The article barely mentioned his book or his loss. Instead, it was a breathless piece about Damien Blackwood's unprecedented appearance, accompanied by a stunning photo of him and Liliana. They looked regal, powerful, a modern-day power couple. There was a smaller, unflattering, candid shot of Bentley, caught mid-sentence as he confronted them, his face tight with anger. He looked petty and small. He clicked on another link, a popular culture blog. The headline was even more brutal. Awkward night for author Bentley Ashford as ex-wife steals show with billionaire beau, then he loses top prize. The article was a gleeful blow-by-blow account of his public humiliation. It quoted anonymous sources from the party who described his meltdown and Isabella's hasty exit. It was filled with speculation about Liliana and Damien, painting her as a mysterious phoenix rising from the ashes. He threw his phone across the room. It clattered against the wall and slid to the floor, the screen dark. He was trapped. The narrative was out of his control. He had spent his entire career mastering words, bending them to his will, to create fictions that the world adored. Now, the unassailable truth of reality reported in a million pixels and gallons of ink was crushing him. He paced the apartment like a caged animal, the silence pressing in on him. This was Liliana's doing. It had to be. This was her revenge, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. The quiet, mousy woman he thought he knew had been hiding a Machiavellian strategist. But a deeper, more unsettling thought gnawed at him. Liliana's words from the night before echoed in his mind. I was the foundation, and when I left, I took it with me. Hollow. The word clung to him. Driven by a masochistic impulse, he walked into his pristine office. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but they were mostly for show. The real work happened on his sleek iMac. On a stand beside it, propped up like a holy relic, was a hard copy of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. He picked it up. The cover, with his name in bold embossed letters, felt alien in his hands. He opened it to a random page. It was a passage that critics had universally praised for its raw emotional insight into the protagonist's grief. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It had weight. It settled in the corners like dust clung to the curtains and slept in the hollow of her side of the bed. It was the ghost of a language we no longer spoke, a dialect of sorrow I had to learn to translate alone. He stared at the words. They were beautiful, they were powerful, and they were not his. A memory sharp and unwelcome pierced through the fog of his anger. A winter afternoon, years ago, Liliana curled on the old armchair in their brownstone, a mug of tea steaming beside her. She wasn't writing a novel, just journaling something she did religiously. He'd asked her what she was writing about. Just trying to describe the quiet, she'd said, her voice soft. After my grandmother passed, the silence in her house. It's not empty, you know. It's full. It's like a presence. He had stored that away. That idea. That feeling. He had taken it. He frantically flipped through the book, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. Page after page, he saw her. Not just her ideas, but her very voice, her unique turn of phrase, the specific, idiosyncratic rhythm of her prose that Arthur Mason had recognized. There was the description of the falling autumn leaves as a slow, rust-colored surrender. That was from a poem she wrote in college and had pinned to the corkboard above her desk for years. There was the protagonist's habit of organizing her books by the emotion they evoked, not by author or genre. That was Liliana's quirky system, something he used to tease her about. The central metaphor of the novel, the echoes of a past life that shaped the present, was the core theme of an unfinished short story. She had let him read a story. She had abandoned after he'd told her it was a little too sentimental, a bit naive. He had lied. He'd seen its potential, its power, and he had discouraged her so he could claim it for himself. He had convinced himself it wasn't theft. It was inspiration. It was alchemy. He was the genius who could take her raw, unrefined emotions and shape them into art. He was the sculptor, and she was the clay. But looking at it now, stripped of his self-delusion, he saw the truth. He was a plagiarist, not of another published author, but of a private life. He had stolen the soul of his own wife and sold it to the world as his own. The book wasn't a masterpiece. It was a meticulously crafted forgery, hollow. The truth was a physical sickness. He stumbled to the bathroom and wrenched his body, trying to expel the poison of his own deceit. When he was done, he gripped the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger. His face, which yesterday had seemed handsome and successful, now looked gaunt and haunted. His eyes were filled with a desperate, panicked fear. He finally understood. Liliana's revenge wasn't the public spectacle at the awards night. That was just the opening act. Her true revenge was this moment, this private, solitary reckoning. She didn't need to expose him. She knew that his success was built on a lie so profound that it would eventually consume him from the inside out. She had let him build his gilded cage and then simply walked away, leaving him to realize he was trapped inside it alone. His phone buzzed from the other room. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A frantic, insistent rhythm. Finally driven by a sliver of desperate hope that it might be Isabella calling to reconcile, he retrieved it from the floor. The screen was cracked, but it lit up with a string of texts from his agent Marcus. Call me now. A journalist just contacted me. A guy named Marcus Thorne. No, not me, another Marcus. He's asking about your early drafts. He's asking about Liliana's old writings. Someone talked Bentley. He says he has copies of her journals. Bentley, for the love of God, call me. What the hell is going on? The blood drained from his face. It wasn't just a private reckoning anymore. The ghost he had tried to contain within the pages of his book was breaking free. The foundation Liliana had taken with her was beginning to crumble, and the entire hollow edifice he had built was about to come crashing down on his head. Bentley awoke to the aggressive grey light of a New York hangover. The tuxedo from the night before was a crumpled heap on the floor of his sterile minimalist apartment. Isabella was gone. There was no note, only an empty space on the pillow beside him, a ghost of his failed triumph. He stumbled to the kitchen, his hands shaking, bypassing the espresso machine for his phone. He needed to see the narrative to find some spin that might salvage his pride. He found none. The headlines were a public execution. The New York Times, Blackwood's surprise appearance at Golden Quills. Fuels Hollywood speculation, Liliana Mason, ex-wife of nominee Ashford at center of mystery deal. His name was a footnote. A culture blog was more brutal. Awkward night for author Bentley Ashford as ex-wife steals show with billionaire beau, then he loses top prize. The article featured an unflattering candid of him confronting Liliana. His face tight with anger, making him look petty and small. He hurled the phone across the room, the clatter of its impact, a pathetic echo in the vast, silent apartment. The narrative was out of his control. He paced the room like a caged animal, Liliana's words from the party ringing in his ears. I was the foundation, and when I left, I took it with me. Hollow. The word clung to him. Drawn by a masochistic impulse, he walked into his office. There on its stand like a holy relic was a copy of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. He picked it up, the cover with his name in bold letters, feeling alien in his hands. He opened it to a random page, a passage praised by critics for its raw emotional insight. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It had weight. It settled in the corners like dust. A dialect of sorrow I had to learn to translate alone. He stared at the words. They were beautiful, and they were not his. A memory pierced through his anger, sharp and unwelcome. Liliana, years ago, curled in an armchair, telling him about the quiet in her grandmother's house after she passed. It's not empty, she had said. It's full. It's like a presence. He had taken it. He had taken her grief and called it his genius. Frantically, he flipped through the book, a cold sweat on his skin. Page after page, he saw her phrasing, her metaphors, her soul. The protagonist's habit of organizing books by the emotion they evoked. That was Liliana's quirky system. The central theme of Echoes was from an unfinished story he'd told her was naive, so he could mine it for himself. He had convinced himself it was alchemy, that he was the artist elevating her raw material. But stripped of his self-delusion, he saw the truth. He was a plagiarist, not of a book, but of a life. The masterpiece wasn't his creation. It was a forgery of his wife's soul, hollow. The truth was a physical sickness. He stumbled to the bathroom and wrenched his body, trying to expel the poison of his own deceit. He gripped the sink, staring at his reflection. The man looking back was a stranger, his face gaunt and haunted. He finally understood Liliana's true revenge. It wasn't the public spectacle. It was this private, solitary reckoning. She had let him build his gilded cage and then simply walked away, leaving him to realize he was trapped inside it alone. His phone buzzed from the other room, a frantic, insistent rhythm. He retrieved it from the floor. The screen was cracked, but lit up with texts from his agent, Marcus. Call me now. A journalist just contacted me. Marcus Thorne. He's asking about your early drafts. He's asking about Liliana's old writings. He says he has copies of her journals. Someone talked Bentley. Bentley, for the love of God, call me. The blood drained from his face. This journalist wasn't a gossip columnist. He was a career ender. Bentley dialed, his hands slick. Tell me this is a joke, he whispered. I wish I could. Marcus's voice was grim. This guy Thorne has scans of Liliana's journals. He read me passages over the phone. They were verbatim Bentley. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. That exact line. He's giving us 24 hours to comment before he publishes. There was a damning pause. Is it true? Bentley's silence was his confession. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathed. We're done. My agency can't be associated with this. I'll release a pro forma denial, but after that, you're on your own. The line went dead. The final door of his professional life slammed shut. As if on cue, he heard a key in the lock. Isabella stepped inside, not with the hesitant air of a returning lover, but with the grim purpose of an undertaker. She carried an empty tote bag. Isabella, he began. Don't, she said, holding up a hand. She walked past him to the bedroom and began methodically collecting her things. What are you doing? He asked, his voice cracking. She faced him, her eyes clear and cold, all adoration replaced by a profound disappointment. Last night, she said, when she looked at me, your ex-wife, she didn't look angry. She looked sorry for me. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. She knew who you were, and she knew I was about to find out. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was such a fool. I believed it all, the genius, the masterpiece. I thought I was part of your story, but I was just a prop you used to hurt her. That's not true. He pleaded the words, sounding false even to him. Isn't it? She replied, her voice soft with a sad finality. You don't love me, Bentley. You love how I made you feel. You love the reflection I showed you. But the man in that reflection isn't real. She zipped her bag and walked to the door. Is the book a misunderstanding, Bentley? She asked, her voice laced with a final chilling question. Or is it just the one lie you finally got caught telling? She didn't wait for an answer. She walked out, closing the door gently behind her. The soft click echoed the one from his phone call. He was utterly alone now, stripped of his award, his reputation, his agent, and his lover. He was just a hollow man in an empty apartment, waiting for the world to learn the truth. The story broke, not with a bang, but with the devastating precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Marcus Thorne's article in The Atlantic, titled "The Echo in the Room," laid Bentley's literary theft bare. It wasn't an accusation, it was an autopsy. Side-by-side comparisons of Liliana's private journals and Bentley's published prose were irrefutable. The piece was impeccably researched, quoting old friends who remembered Liliana's unique voice, and even her father Arthur Mason, who simply stated, "My daughter is, and always has been, a brilliant woman. I'm glad the world is finally getting a glimpse of it." The professional fallout was immediate and absolute. Sterling and Ross halted all printing of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. The Golden Quill Committee officially rescinded his nomination, and his name became toxic overnight. Bentley retreated into a self-imposed darkness in his apartment, a ghost in the life he'd built, haunted by the constant, silent pulse of notifications on his phone, each one another nail in his career's coffin. In stark contrast, Liliana Mason's star ascended. She remained elegantly silent on the scandal itself, a move that amplified her dignity. Her power move came a week later with the announcement of a major media deal. At its heart was her own memoir, its title, A Quiet, Brilliant Reclamation, A Different Kind of Dawn. She gave a single, poised television interview. She spoke with profound intelligence about the journey of finding one's own truth and the silencing of creative voices, but never once uttered Bentley's name. He was simply a chapter I have closed. Bentley watched from his darkened living room, finally understanding. Her power didn't come from Damian Blackwood or public revenge. It came from the unshakable confidence of someone who had survived a fire and knew with absolute certainty who she was. Months bled into a bleak winter. Bentley's finances collapsed under the weight of his disgrace. He was forced to sell the apartment, his art, and his designer furniture, the props for a life that was no longer his. He moved into a small, anonymous room, a nobody in a city that had once worshipped him. One afternoon, he saw her book displayed in a shop window. The cover was a simple, powerful photograph of Liliana, her gaze direct and strong. It was a #1 bestseller. With the last of his cash, he bought a copy and sat on a park bench, reading the final chapter. Her words were not for him, but they struck him with the force of a final judgment. "Some have called my story one of revenge," she wrote. "It is not. Revenge is a conversation with the past. I am only interested in a conversation with the future. Justice is not about punishing those who wronged you. It is about building a life so full and true that their chapter becomes an insignificant footnote. The greatest power is not to destroy, but to create." Bentley closed the book. A cold single tear traced a path through his unshaven cheek. It was a tear of pure annihilation. She hadn't just defeated him, she had transcended him entirely. He was the footnote, a faded echo. He was left with nothing but the truth in a profound and empty silence, the utter absence of the man he had pretended to be. And so the curtain falls on Bentley Ashford, a man who flew too close to a sun he did not create. His story serves as a chilling reminder that success built on deceit is a house of cards destined to collapse under the weight of truth. It wasn't the public spectacle or the loss of a trophy that destroyed him. It was the quiet, undeniable power of a voice he tried to silence. Liliana Mason didn't seek revenge in the traditional sense. Her victory was far more profound. She reclaimed her narrative, her art, and her life, proving that the most powerful spotlight is the one that shines from within. What did you think of Liliana's ultimate triumph? Was it poetic justice or something more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal and rebirth, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a story of true karma, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life dramas that are stranger and more compelling than fiction. Thank you for listening.